early September 2023, Sue and I packed up the motorhome and headed to the New York Finger Lakes area to camp with our good friends Don and Doris and John and Mishka. Our plan was to catch up with them at Letchworth State Park, then travel with them to Watkins Glen State Park. For this trip, we headed up I-71 towards Cleveland, then headed east on I-90 where we stayed one night as Harvest Host members at the Winery at Spring Hill. We enjoyed our relaxing evening at this winery in Geneva, Ohio. We had wine and appetizers on the large outside patio. Cassie joined us as we listened to a live band for a couple of hours. We were then ready to head back to the motorhome to crash for the evening. The next morning, we got up and continued the remainder of our 373-mile drive north on I-90 to Buffalo, then across the hills, valleys, and farm fields of New York to arrive at Letchworth State Park by mid-afternoon. Letchworth State Park, renowned as the Grand Canyon of the East, is one of the most significantly magnificent areas in the eastern U.S. The park is 14,427 acres and 17 miles following the course of the Genesee River. The distance from the campground to the falls area is about 11 miles. The Genesee River roars through the gorge over three major waterfalls: the Lower Falls, the Middle Falls, and the Upper Falls. The cliffs surrounding the river are as high as 600 feet in some places, surrounded by lush forests. William Pryor Letchworth, a businessman and philanthropist, bought the land around the Middle Falls and established the Glen Iris Estate. For 50 years, he expanded and developed his holdings, and ultimately gifted the land to the state in 1907. For our 3-day visit to the park, on the second day we hiked the Kisil Point Trail. This trail we picked up at the campground. It is about 2 miles long and dead ends at Kisil Point, overlooking the Genesee River and the Silver Lake outlet. On the third day, we drove down to the falls, including a 3-mile out-and-back hike to the Lower Falls. This hike is considered moderately challenging given the elevation change. We then drove to Inspiration Point, then to the Upper Falls, and then the Middle Falls. Inspiration Point and both falls were easy to walk to. We enjoyed our visit to Letchworth State Park and highly recommend a visit to the Grand Canyon of the East. We began our almost 2-mile hike on the Kisil Point Trail from our campground. The Kisil Point Trail passes this old picnic area that was constructed by the Gibsonville Civilian Conservation Corps in 1934. The hike was fairly simple with the exception of the descent towards Kisil Point. At the point, we could see where the gorge of the Silver Lake outlet meets the gorge of the Genesee River. The only issue is what goes down must go back up on our return trip. Oh yeah, there's the river.
Genesee River.
There's a good clearing. Heading down to the water. You think we can make it, girl? I think we can make it down. I don't know about making it back up. It's an awfully long way down. We've reached the end, girl. We made it. Okay, we're climbing back up it now. Cassie has no problem. Yay! Hooray!
Made it, girl.
As we returned from our hike and approached the campground, we walked through a field of wildflowers. The following day, we headed down to the falls. The hike to the Lower Falls was relatively easy at first, with some beautiful overlooks of the gorge, the Genesee River, and the historic bridge built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in 1935. We eventually made it down the hill and had some great views of the Lower Falls. climbed down a series of steps to make our way to the historic pedestrian bridge so we could actually cross the Genesee River. After our hike, we made it to Inspiration Point with a view of the upper and middle falls. We then drove to the parking lot at the upper falls and took an easy walk to multiple overlooks. Our final stop was the Middle Falls, which was again an easy walk from the parking lot. We had a closer view of the Middle Falls than any of the other falls. After our visit here, we met Don and Doris and John and Mishka for dinner at the Glen Iris Inn. It was a great way to end our trip to Letchworth. The next morning, we got up to make our way over to Watkins Glen State Park. This was a relatively short 100-mile drive. We decided to take a rural route east over to the northern tip of Seneca Lake and then drive south along the lake. The Finger Lakes region of New York is very well known for growing grapes. There are many vineyards and wineries in this area, as you can see on this map. On our way to Watkins Glen, Sue and I decided to stop at one of the vineyards, Fox Run, to have a snack and a flight of wine. It was a very relaxing stop with Seneca Lake as a backdrop. We spent a couple of hours here. This region is known for its Rieslings, and based on our samplings of both the reds and the whites, we agreed that the Riesling was the best. After walking the beautiful grounds and vineyards and buying a few bottles, we climbed back in the motorhome for our short drive to Watkins Glen. Sue and I stayed at the Watkins Glen campground on the Cayuga Circle. The campground was centrally located within the park and within walking distance to many hiking trails and the visitor center. The visitor center is located on the east end of the park near the town. Watkins Glen is the most famous of the Finger Lakes state parks, with a reputation for leaving visitors spellbound while walking the Gorge Trail. This trail can be challenging given the many steps that you must go up and down, and the puddles of muddy water throughout. Sue and I hiked from the campground to the Couch's staircase where we descended down to the Gorge Trail. Within the Gorge Trail, the Glen stream descends 400 feet past 200-foot cliffs, generating 19 waterfalls along its course. Sue and I were amazed as the Gorge Trail winds right next to and over and under all the waterfalls. Sue and I had a great time with Don and Doris and John and Mishka at Letchworth State Park and Watkins Glen State Park. The waterfalls were amazing and so different at the two state parks. The expanse and size of the few large falls at Letchworth, while at Watkins Glen we had the cavern feel with many relatively narrow falls. All were beautiful in their own right. It is now time to leave New York and say goodbye to our friends. We are headed south into Pennsylvania to stop for more waterfalls at Ricketts Glen State Park on our way to see our son in Philadelphia.